Okay, everybody, we're back on live stream and we're back with the panel discussion. Can I ask the first? Sorry, just before I go to open the questions, just a few quick reflections just as we head into the Q&A that I certainly took up from both Deirdre and Anne's presentation. Firstly is the point that Deirdre made about patterns of usage being important, and I think there was some good data to reflect that as well. I think the second one was just picked up was interestingly the cocaine and ecstasy use being high by comparison, having grown and also being high by comparison with other international data. And also the increase in the types of cannabis use was kind of clearly laid out as well. And then on the people side of it, many people delaying their usage of drugs later was set out in terms of the age profiles being taken up later. That was an interesting one. And then there was a couple of other final things as well. Actually, the issue of drugs usage being nearly equally prevalent across all socio-economic profiles or communities was interesting, but also the fact that those areas of higher social deprivation suffer more harm. So, you know, there's important trends coming through all of that. But look, if I can open it out, first of all, to table 4, firstly, to Rebecca.
Hello. So my name is Rebecca, and the question from our table is, according to research, why do you think that women stop using drugs earlier in their lives than men? We wondered if it had anything to do with reproduction.
I suppose you're right. I think we don't capture that in our surveys, but it would appear that, you know, women are getting to, dare I say it, they're maturing a little bit quicker perhaps than men, and they are getting to an age where they're focusing on their career and they're focusing on perhaps having a family, and so we would think that would be the main kind of driver for the tapering off of female drug use into their late 20s, early 30s. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? There's quite a number of questions just around the issue of leakages with alcohol, etc. But if I can just go to, I think it's Liam on table 15 first, please.
How are you doing? Yeah, our question is just in terms of cannabis being a gateway drug. Should alcohol not be considered more of a gateway drug? And in some cases, does cannabis not kind of conclude people's drug taking, as in if they get cannabis, they wouldn't maybe do a harder drug? Do you have any research on that? Thanks.
Thanks, Liam.
Yeah, I'll take that. I think, yes, you are correct with alcohol. It probably is the main gateway drug, and generally people don't take drugs that don't use alcohol. And we see the age people start drinking at earlier than they start using drugs. We don't have much research in Ireland as to what order they do, or, you know, if that is the order for everybody, or in relation to cannabis. People would generally use cannabis before moving on to other drugs. But that would be the research as we would see it.
And again, if any of the panel want to come in at any stage, we'll try to get through as many as we can, though, which is useful. Can I ask Kieran on table 14?
From the information we received there's no significant difference in the use between the socio-economic classes, but there is in the deprived areas, and we were wondering how does that show up? Is it very significant as opposed to the overall issue? And similar in the unemployed, so the impact it has on the society.
Yeah, I can take that one.
Okay.
That's fine.
I think Anne's side showed that the actual drug use is more or less the same across society. When you look at the high impact of drug use, the numbers coming into treatment with problematic drug use are far higher in the more deprived areas. And we've only just looked at that data now, but it's quite stark. What we would like to do as well is look at deaths as well and make that same comparison. So drug use at a population level is the same, okay, across society, but the harms, the more serious effects of drug use are felt more keenly in the more deprived areas.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Can I ask Maura on table 7, please? Just 1 second, Maura. We get a microphone to you. It'll be easier for everybody to hear it. Thank you.
We're wondering, is the high number of young males aged 25 to 34 using drugs related to them being at that period in their life in the workforce and so having the money to buy them? And like Table 4 asked, is the lower number of women in that age bracket related, their lower use of drugs, is that related to the fact that they're at childbearing age? Or is it other factors?
Yeah, I think so, and we'd see the same in relation to alcohol use. We, obviously in the surveys we don't ask people why they use, but we can only surmise based on the data we have. I do think the fact maybe women mature quicker and they get settled down and they're thinking about having a family, that I'm sure that does play a part. With obviously, if you have more disposable income, you probably have more money that you can spend if you're using drugs in, as part of your part in recreational settings. So I think that that's likely to be the case, but we cannot be sure.
Thanks. And again, I'm trying to get as many questions in as I can, and then we'll open it more to the panel. Just Kyle on table 2, please.
How's it going? I suppose my question is, just based off the data that you showed us and how that it was random selection, is there a scope for research to focus on more regional like communities, whether it's geographical or kind of services? Like there was a 9% of people who are employed take drugs, but if you look at the likes of the service industry, like hospitality, where cocaine use is prevalent, or even through users who use gambling services. Is there a scope for maybe more focused data to get a better representation from the population of where drug use is, because those percentages seem quite low?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose from the surveys that we've looked at, they are representative of the entire population, but it would definitely be interesting to look at specific targeted populations. Budgets are probably an issue as well for that. But I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Brian or Owen.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is there's a big survey of higher education students done, I think 2019, and it was a very big sample, and it showed, I think, far higher levels of drug use than the population. But that's part of a government programme to deal with drug use at their level. So it would need to be incorporated into that as well as a policy measure.
Okay. Helen on table 13, please.
Hi, I'm Helen, and the question from our table is, does the figure on opioids include medical treatment, such as from methadone clinic settings, or is it just problematic use, or is it the mix of both?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Does the figure on opioids include medical treatment, such as from methadone clinic settings, or is it just problematic use, or is it the mix of both?
No, it would include people who are on methadone in treatment settings, yes. So it would use a technique where we access people who are in treatment services. Also, we looked at GPs, treatment data, prisons and probation services. So yes, it would include those.
Okay. If I can, thanks Helen, if I can ask Paul on table 11, please.
Thanks, I'm Paul. The question from our table is, We note that the age of initiation into drug use has increased since 2002. I'm just wondering if the panel has any information on why that might have happened.
There's a lot of different reasons for it, and I suppose it's young people are living at home for longer, they're more involved in sports and extracurricular activities. The whole social online presence has made a difference to socialising, so it's basically no one thing is, we don't know why they are delaying it, but there's a multitude of different reasons for it. So I have there's a lot of more reasons, but not just one in particular.
And can I ask Eamon on table 10, please?
Neil Moggatt. We're just wondering, how reflective is the data that we're working on here from the webinar, as there's a 2-year time lapse, and we've had lockdown and everything since, and especially since there's new drugs coming in, we were just told earlier on, and since the surveys have been drawn from webinars as opposed to hard evidence from hospitals and drug treatment centres, and how do they stack up together?
Yeah, you're right. A lot has changed in the last few years, more so than we would have seen probably between other surveys. Where data collection is ongoing at the minute for the next version of the survey, and it will be very interesting to see what the impact of COVID has had on the prevalence of drug use. It'll probably be towards the end of the year before we'll have the first results from that. I suppose from the web surveys we did undertake, and they're available on the HRB website, we did 2 web surveys during COVID, and both which asked questions specifically on the impact that COVID had on people's drug use. And we saw different results in relation to different drugs. For cannabis, quite a high proportion increased their use, while some decreased. We saw a lot of people who used ecstasy said they reported a reduction in their ecstasy use, whereas cocaine, we saw a reduction, even though some people did say they also increased their use. So I think I would suspect that the next time we look at the results, they might be different as a result of COVID, but unfortunately we won't have them until the end of this year.
Can I just ask on from a kind of European monitoring perspective, if, I don't know, we'll have some further data tomorrow, but just in general from what the team presented this morning, is there any jump out differences or trends, or is it fairly consistent?
Thanks. I think it varies by drug you're talking about, but I'd just like to pick up on one point that was made there about how relevant is the data, because it kind of comes before answering that. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact on monitoring systems, because it's affected things like treatment centres and how they operate and how they collect the data. So some of the trends that we see, they have been distorted by that. So we need to bear that in mind. What we also have to bear in mind is when you're talking about illegal drug use, it's a hidden, stigmatized behavior, and it's very difficult to monitor and measure. So we use a multi-measure analysis. We look at as many different indicators as we can. So some of the things that we use, and I believe that they're being looked at or being developed in Ireland, looking at funding for them, are things like wastewater analysis of drug residues in municipal wastewater. That gives a more kind of real-time picture that would complement something like a survey, but it is more up-to-date but less representative of the whole population. We also have things like drug checking, which might be a targeted thing, which is run by the HSE here sometimes, where they look at festivals and they might be able to see what substances are being used, or information from drug consumption rooms where people might be using substances, and they can get an analysis of that, or also things like syringe residue analysis. These are all, and the web survey which is mentioned, they're all newer indicators which help give a more real-time and picture and balance things out. In terms of something like cannabis, and the reason I mention all this is just because comparisons have to be made with extreme caution in the European picture, and it's really the main point with the European Drug Report is we're looking at a hidden stigmatized behavior. Countries differ in terms of the tools that they have to actually monitor and look at drug use. But if you take something like cannabis, you could look at Ireland is probably, you know, a bit above the EU average for some parts. So it's looked at for lifetime last year use. I don't know, if you could take a country like Portugal and maybe it's a bit below that, those EU averages. But a key point would be that the data from Portugal is from 2016 and the data from Ireland is from 2019. So it's quite difficult to effectively answer that question. What we can say is the problem is there and we need to keep doing something about it and looking at solutions and responses. In terms of things like injecting drug use, yes, it's a very serious issue in Ireland. There's a large population of people who are injecting drugs. There's a significant opioid problem with other substances being used as well. It features prominently in the top group of countries where drug-related deaths are an issue. So that's something that is probably a bit different than some other European countries. But a key point with that is Europe has many drugs problems. It's not one thing, and they differ in terms of how each country experiences them.
Thanks for that. Oh, I know we'll hear more tomorrow as well. Just can I go to Eliza on table 6 with a particular question? There's 2 questions on the table, but one particularly around the different socio-economic groups and what drugs might be taken amongst different groups.
Our question kind of, it's basically 2 questions in one. So although the economic classes, they had the same amount of drugs, did the drugs differ? If they did, would legislation bringing the drug use in put extra pressure onto mental health services like that's already stretched?
It's a really good question.
And well done for getting your 2 questions in together, so fair play to you.
And in good time.
Well, in terms when we were looking at it, we looked at all drug use because if you try to distill down to drugs like cocaine and ecstasy, yes, they're increasing, but the proportions that use them are so low that the results wouldn't be very stable if we were to look at it across a whole range of different socioeconomic groupings. So that's why we've just looked at cannabis and all drug use, and that was found to be consistent. I suspect, you know, when we do look at, you know, problem opioid use, you would see regions such as Dublin where it would be much higher than compared to the rest of the country. But just with our surveys, they wouldn't be powerful enough to be able to look at it in that level of detail for us to have very reliable results. So that's why we haven't presented them.
Okay. Can I ask maybe Alana on table 8, please?
I'll have to go around here because I didn't think you'd call me again.
Put you on the spot there, Alana. Apologies.
Thanks. So based on, there was one slide on the statistics of opioid use between 2006 and 2019. And you could see a correlation between the 15 to 24-year-olds in 2006 and then the 25 to 34-year-olds, I think it was, in the next slide, or in the next graph. But the 2019 figures for the 15 to 24-year-olds was only 730 or something like that, so it was 4%, which was a lot lower. What did we do as a country? What initiative did we use to drop it by so much?
I think the treatment services was the big difference. Treatment services and community-based treatment services, which means that there were not as many people in communities using heroin, and given the opportunity to initiate other people into heroin use. There's a lot of different causes. It became an unattractive drug. It's not pleasant to see a person that uses drugs, that uses heroin, and is intoxicated. But I think the community services has the big difference. I think I think before 2006 even there was a lot more. There was a lot more community-based drug treatment services as opposed to the big treatment services in the city centre, which meant that there was more opportunity for people to come into treatment and less opportunity then for the younger cohorts to start drug treatment as well. The other thing about the older cohorts as well, we should bear in mind, their numbers have increased. In a way, that reflects the developments in health services and harm reduction services during that period as well. There's a lot more needle exchange. There's a lot of hepatitis C treatment, and hepatitis C was a big killer not long ago. So people are actually, they're living longer. In a way, it's a positive story. So that the younger people are not beginning heroin use, and the older cohorts are, they're actually living longer.
Thanks. And there's quite a number of questions came through around the collation of data and how can we be trusted or any. So there's a lot of very similar questions which I think are good. But can I ask Brian maybe on table 14 just to reflect the question from that table? I think it'll help open that to other tables' questions as well.
Hi there. We were just wondering about the accuracy of the data. Like, how can you take into account active drug users? Because we wouldn't imagine that they would actually engage with surveys and things like that. And as a judge pointed out earlier, part of her helping with the rehabilitation was actually helping people who were illiterate. So is there a better way, like the sewage system testing, that would actually also validate your surveys and reach more people?
Yeah, okay, thanks for the question. One survey is not like the gold standard going to measure absolutely everything, and I think we've moved to a stage where it's recognised that a lot of different approaches is the best way to measure drug use. So yes, having wastewater analysis that will complement your surveys, and each method has their own, strengths and limitations. A household survey, you're more like, it can be more difficult to find the people who might be more likely to use drugs, or younger single people. It might be harder to catch them at home, or they may be less likely to want to participate. However, with your household surveys, they are representative of the population, and they're done the same way over time. And again, it is drugs are illegal, so we don't know, or we cannot know whether people have told the truth. We just, their confidentiality is always assured, but we can never be 100% sure that they've told the truth in all the questions. I suppose with wastewater analysis, yes, it is very good for showing us what type of drugs are being used, but it gives us no information as to who are using them, or the numbers of people, or the patterns of use. Web surveys, we found the last survey we did, we found that we had huge engagement, and almost 6,000 people over a period of just a few weeks engaged with the survey, and we had a very positive response to that, and people seem to be very happy to share their experiences of drug use. Again, we can never go back and corroborate and just double, to be sure what they're saying is the actuality. But, as I said, their surveys are one part of a large suite of measures to look at drug use.
Okay, and I've one which I think might be a short question, and hopefully but an interesting one as well. Avrik from table 5, please.
We were just wondering why you stopped surveying at 64, and with the ageing population that are now living longer, will that continue?
Actually, since 2014, we've included 65 and over because, and we've expanded the survey to include more questions on alcohol, and the last 2 surveys also contain questions on gambling. The reason I didn't present them was the first 3 surveys, including the 2002 survey, only included 15 to 64-year-olds. So if you're comparing that age group, if you were comparing all ages in 2019 to the limited age group back in 2002, they wouldn't be valid, because our surveys would show a very, very low proportion of those aged 65 and over use drugs. Across Europe, most countries just use 15 to 64. So for us to do comparisons with other countries, we just confined it to 15 to 64. However, if you are interested in the results across the whole population, the report, the National Drug and Alcohol Survey from 2019, we have the results from all age groups, and they'd be available in that, including those over age 65 and over.
Okay, thank you, folks. First of all, please show your appreciation for the panel. There's a lot of good information. Thank you.